PV, my brother.
My man, Anthony, how are you?
Oh, fuck.
It's been a while since I did it.
So I was talking to Santana on the way here, my assistant, and I was like, she's like, are you nervous or whatever? And I was like, actually, if there's one person that I'm not nervous to do a podcast with, it's PV, because you've been on one by yourself, one with Emma, and one with you and Mitt.
Yeah,
so this is actually our fourth episode.
Right. I forget the online ones because I remember it was such a
the online ones are the differences.
When I came in person.
Yeah, exactly. So we've only actually ever done one in person. That was the one at Soho Innovation Lab with me, you, and Emma.
Yeah. Very cool, man. I'm glad to be back. I was just thinking too, like it's been a while since I did a podcast, or even before I would always go on and do like Zoom presentations or Zoom podcasts and stuff like that. So it's the first one after a while. I'm glad it's with you,
And actually, I haven't filmed a podcast. When was the last time you filmed a podcast?
Sometime in the pandemic, and it would have been virtual. I want to say like late 2020.
So the last time I filmed a podcast was my 35th episode. It was in the fall of November 2020. I think it was November.
Okay.
Or October, and so it's been fucking 2 years.
Yeah.
And it was with Brad Poulios, who's like a professor of entrepreneurship at U of T, and it was virtual.
Right.
And then what happened was like in the new year we were going to film season 5, and I was like, I hate virtual podcasts. Like the vibes are just not the same.
Yeah.
You know. So then I was like,
it really isn't. It feels more like an interview versus.
Yeah, it sucks.
The best part of this is like it feels like a casual conversation.
We're here. It's like we're having drinks. We're having dinner.
Yeah,
right?
yeah, exactly.
And then so then I was like, okay, let's just I'm only going to take on people that are in person, right? And then so then I was looking for like in-person spots in Toronto, and there were 0. This was in April of 2021.
Yeah.
There were 0 places to host a podcast in person in Toronto.
Yeah.
Unless you went to like one of those music studios, and we went to one, me and Kieran.
Yeah.
And it was all just like, it looked like it was from like the 1990s. Like the walls smelt like cigarettes and like stuff like that.
Old school.
It was like a guy with a big beard and long hair who looked like he just loved the 90s too much.
Yeah.
Now he's got leather skin.
Yeah.
And then that's when the idea of Creator Club first started, May of 2021, which was when we were like, okay, if there's no podcast studio, I said to Kieran, I'm like, halt all podcasts going forward. We're going to start a fucking podcast studio. And that was in like May. In the summer, we were looking for places. I pitched Anthony Lacavera on the idea. I've told you about him.
Yeah.
He kind of liked it. He was like, well, I got an office space. Gave us a little bit of money. We did this. Yeah. Right? That was fall of 2021, right? And then we played with the idea for a while, got it set up. That took like 6-7 months. Then it was open. Like, think about it. That was like a year ago, right?
Man. Yeah.
And now finally fucking a year ago, or okay, maybe 10 months, whatever. Now our first podcast.
That's amazing, man. And it's also a classic entrepreneur story.
And then I was like, it is. I love that. Thank you.
Found a need and took care of it, solved the problem.
Agreed. And so then we were like, okay, who's going to be the first guest?
Yeah.
And boom, without a thought, I was like, PV, of course.
I appreciate it, man. I'm honored.
Full circle, right?
Yeah.
Okay, very so cool. Why don't we get started?
Yeah, let's do this.
We good to go?
We're good to go. Maybe just intro him and stuff.
Are we recording?
Yeah, we're good.
Good. Okay.
All right.
So this is episode 36.
Sir.
It's the first episode of season 5. Okay. Give me a little bit of this.
All right, let's go. Let's do this.
Get the vibes going. Hello, and welcome to this week's episode of What They Did Not Teach You in School. This is actually episode 36 of the podcast, and the first actual episode of season 5. And when we were deciding on who to bring on the podcast, I thought, who is the person who's like the one I look forward to the most when interviewing or having on the show, and the person who spits the most wisdom and facts? PV. So here we got Pirasaanth Varatharajan. How did I do?
Yes, sir, you nailed it, man.
I did nail it? That was like my Italian way of saying it. So I hope it rolled off the tongue. It was like Varatharajan.
Yes, right? Sir.
And he's well known on Instagram. He's a CPA, also a big real estate investor and just fellow wise investor. So welcome, PV. Thanks for coming.
Thank you, Anthony, my man. It's a pleasure to be here.
Great.
I'm very honored.
Before we get started, I just want to say a word from our sponsors. This episode is sponsored by Creator Club Studios, a marketplace and platform that connects content creators and brands in order to tell their story. I want to thank them very much for blessing us with this space, and very grateful for the people behind the camera right now, Jesse and our producer extraordinaire, Valentina. They put this all together today, so thank you very much.
Amazing.
Okay, so PV, why don't you tell us a little bit about yourself? Because you're an accountant by trade. For you ran an accounting practice. You got into real estate investing. Why don't you tell us a little bit about the people that haven't heard you so far? How you've gotten into this room today with me, looking so good.
Right, appreciate it.
Post-pandemic.
Yeah, for sure, Anthony. So, my name is Pirasaanth. I go by PV. I'm a real estate investor, chartered professional accountant, and a real estate agent as well. So initially started off going down the traditional route, went to school for a number of years, got my CPA designation, worked at an accounting firm. Eventually, being someone that's very entrepreneurial since a young age, went off to start my own firm with a good partner of mine, Mitt. We worked on our firm for many years, and while we were doing that, got into real estate investing.
Who didn't? It's the GTA.
Yeah, exactly. But the real thing that kind of led me there was I'm working all these crazy hours at PwC. How do I make some real money, and how do I generate wealth? And that's how just even doing some Google searches and what's the best way to do this, came across real estate investing as a way to do that. We'll get more into that later on, but currently, me and my partners, we have an organization called Foundation Capital Holdings, where we invest in large multifamily real estate buildings and utilize the power of leverage to generate strong returns.
I love what you guys are doing at Foundation, because you guys are all young guys, millennials, and that's usually dominated by older generation, the boomers. So I really love seeing that, right?
Taking on the boomers.
Yeah, exactly. Right. It is dominated. Like the REIT game, the private equity game in real estate is majorly old people.
Right.
So what kind of gave you the kahunas in order to get into that?
Yeah. So it was very much a process, Anthony. We started with investing in single-family homes, duplexes, triplexes, right. And as those projects started to work out, and we were seeing the potential real estate had in terms of generating wealth and accelerating our income horizon, very quickly we looked at what the next big step would be, which would be the multifamily space, doing the same thing but on a much larger scale. Right. And instead of managing 1 unit, 2 unit, 3 units at all these separate things, why not just shove 50 units under one roof? And fundamentally, the model is very much the same, and it's going to be on a bigger scale. Let's use this as a way to scale our portfolio, find out the nuances associated with this, and really double down on that. What gave us the cojones? I don't really have an answer for you. I think the three partners were all just someone who are comfortable with risk, assuming we've ran our numbers, we've done our due diligence, and sometimes you just have to go for it, right? Maybe not take on a 50 unit as your first project, but start with a 10 units, see how it goes. There's obviously going to be hiccups and mistakes along the way. As long as you're learning from them and using it in your future projects, the sky can be the limit.
I love that. Beautiful. We'll definitely talk about that more in a bit. Before we get into it, I want to kind of kick off the podcast by talking about something that you can't avoid, whether you're on Instagram, going to the grocery store, at the corner pumping your gas, seeing your electricity bill at the end of every single month, inflation.
Yeah.
And the Bank of Canada just increased interest rates again yesterday, and it's just like, well, if everything is going up with prices, like the price of cost of goods and whatnot, right? Why would the government make it that much harder by increasing interest rates on us? That's a lot of the questions that we're getting. Why don't we start off by talking about what caused the inflation, and then why is the government increasing interest rates second, in your opinion?
Yeah, for sure. I think one of the big things that caused inflation was, the start of the pandemic started to happen. During that period, one of the first, response actions the government took was to significantly decrease interest rates, making it very cheap for companies and individuals to borrow money. That, along with all the money that was printed during the pandemic in order to help lend out that additional cash. So when you combined those two things, the goal was, okay, businesses are going to be struggling, people are going to be struggling. Let's offer them the opportunity to borrow money at very cheap rates, and they can utilize that money to keep the business going or to make sure they can keep paying their employees and not go under, while their sources of revenue was essentially cut off for a lot of businesses as they couldn't operate. What ultimately ended up happening was, people and businesses had access to all this cheap debt and went ahead and started using it in, I don't want to use the word crazy, but, shoving it into assets, pumping it into different types of equities, and all that money now going into various asset classes started to pump up the value of these things and increase spending in a lot of ways. And I think that is what essentially inflated a lot of asset values, inflated a lot of spending, and there's a lot of money being pumped into the market and being used by consumers is how I see it, the problem initially starting. Now the government has stepped in and after seeing these inflation rates and has raised the interest rates to now make it more expensive for people to borrow, and hence now, since money is more expensive to borrow and they have a lot of companies and industries and even individuals are over leveraged from borrowing all of that debt, now there's a lot less disposable income that they have available to spend. And slowly, that's how they're planning to curb the inflation.
Hopefully. And traditionally speaking and theoretically, that is what's going to happen.
Right.
And there was such a big extreme to like the economy practically shutting down, right? Which they had to reduce interest rates so extremely that now we're kind of making up for that years later by an extreme increase in interest rates. There was the whole, you talk about extreme or weird ways of people spending money. Jesse probably knows his boys were spending a lot of money at the clubs. Serb bottles was a thing. You've heard of this, right, Valentina?
Bottles.
Serb bottles.
Oh,
all the people going to the clubs, popping bottles on Justin Trudeau's monetary policy.
Yeah.
That was a thing, right?
Yeah.
And now the opposite's going to happen now.
Mm-hmm. Right.
People are probably just going to be buying water bottles at the clubs for the next little while, right?
Or, a lot of people may not be going to the clubs, but, whether they make that kind of decision is a whole nother conversation. But,
so what are you looking at right now in regards to where the economy is going to go in 2023? I know we don't have a crystal ball. I say that all the time, but right now, a lot of people are kind of tightening up the belt, pulling up the socks, pulling back on certain things, analyzing their month-over-month P&Ls and saying what is truly necessary and how can we pull back. Is that the necessary mindset that you think people should be having going into 2023? What's your thoughts on that?
Yeah, I think people should have kind of what I would call the combined approach. So definitely look at your finances, make sure that you're going to be in an okay place to prepare for the worst if it happens. Again, like you said, we don't have a crystal ball, so we don't know if it's going to be Armageddon or it might be an aggressive slap on the wrist, right? So make sure you look at your overall situation, whether that's if you can be able to keep a roof over your head, pay your bills, how much of your income you can go ahead and reinvest, et cetera. Look at that overall situation. Make sure you have a plan for the worst and a plan for the medium situation, but also look to see if you can take advantage of the opportunities that are going to be presented too. If we do go into a further reduction in value for assets across the various asset classes, are you going to be in a position where you can comfortably acquire assets and ride up that equity gain for when they do appreciate in the future? I'm sure another thing that you're seeing on social media is the cliche quote of many millionaires are made in recessions. There are those who are prepared for recessions come out significantly ahead, and that is very much true. So if you do put that preparation in and acquire the right assets, this is a great opportunity to come out wealthy as well.
Okay, so let's talk a little bit about what you just said there, right? And it's more about like the defense and then the offense, right? And you mentioned a couple things. So one was make sure that you can plan for the worst. But you started off by saying, let's look at your like necessities, being like roof over your head, food, the things that you need, right? How, and to probably to you or some of the really experienced finance and economics people listening to this, they're like, yes, that's interest rates, that's rising costs of goods, et cetera. But what should people be looking at when they're looking at their budget to see the worst? Like, what does the worst look like?
Yeah. So, you know, a big popular effect that a lot of us are feeling right now is going to be their homes that they own. So the mortgages, the more and more the interest rates increase, if you're in a variable mortgage, that payment is going to continue to go up. So, you know, you have to essentially do a sensitivity analysis or
on your own.
Yeah. Or kind of test yourself. Okay, if your interest rate goes up another 2%, what's that payment going to look like? If it goes up another 4%, what's that payment going to look like? I don't have a crystal ball, so I don't know where it will be. They may be almost done increasing it. They may have a lot more increases in mind, but just plan for those worst case scenarios if it were to happen to see, okay, can I continue to afford this? Same thing with the other necessities, utilities, food costs, gasoline, things like that. If you were to see an increase in those prices, what would that look like for your personal financial situation? Can you continue to afford it comfortably? And the biggest takeaway to then move into offense is, after all those payments, how much do you have to play offense? Do you have a lot of extra disposable income available to you that you can go ahead and then utilize to acquire assets?
And some people might not, so they have to go into defense mode for the time being. And for the people that do still go, okay, if interest rates go up to 8%, if my hydro and electrical goes up another $100, $200 a month, if gas prices are going to cost me an extra $200, I'm still good.
Yeah.
What are some asset classes or areas that people can be looking to take offense during this period of time?
Yeah. So I think the very popular one that is a low barrier to entry, which many individuals typically tend to lean to, would be the stocks and equities. You know, we've already seen quite a correction in those, and there's still many solid companies who are just as good as they were fundamentally pre the correction that have dropped in value. So, you know, finding some of those good stocks and investing your money in them can be a very easy thing for individuals to do and put their money into. Then you have someone that's doing what I do, which is real estate, which takes a lot more capital. And, you know, with these interest rates now, the loans that you're going to be getting are reduced. But again, if you can afford to purchase them and get good properties, I would go ahead and invest in real estate as well.
Because you might be able to take advantage of some people that are fire sailing because the interest rates have gone past their affordability. You could be able to get in there and get something on a discount.
Right. So that is one of the opportunities that are definitely present with real estate, you know, especially some of the individuals who may have over leveraged themselves are forced to fire sale, which is unfortunate. But again, that's why people say millionaires are made in recessions, because it's usually a reduced asset sale, which these people are purchasing during the recession.
Unfortunate for them, but fortunate for some others.
Yeah.
It's actually interesting to see, because obviously you don't want to see something happen in like 2008 where there's mass vacancies or like repos of like houses and things like that, right? So I'm fearful of that happening, because over the last 7 to 10 years, as I've been working with clients, that people have been really aggressively buying houses, hoping that they would just take care of themselves through like rent and everything.
Right.
And I'm actually seeing a lot right now through the people that I work with that they're not hitting their renters are not hitting their mortgage rates or carrying costs. And they're actually now having to put money into their properties.
Yeah, for sure.
Do you have any advice for those kinds of people?
Yeah. So, you know, depending on the situation that they've gotten themselves into, my best advice would be find a way to hold the properties. Again, you know, real estate, even though it's a cyclical market, right? You will have times where there's downturns and the prices will decrease and you'll be in a situation like this. But if you can hold that property for the long term, not only will you make your money back on that purchase, but it will continue to appreciate and give you an ROI. Now, what means you can do in order to make that happen, it can vary. So either find a way to get more disposable income from whether it's your job or your active business and be able to service the debt on that property, or look at alternative strategies depending on the asset you have. So, if you have a single family house with an unfinished basement, you may have to come up with that capital required to renovate that basement, put another tenant in there, and reduce the burn.
That's true. I like that. Good idea. Now, I also wanted to go back to like a lot of people. Let's say you were making $100,000 in 2018. That's not worth $100,000 right now, right?
No.
And progressively, it's getting away at you. So, do you have any? You don't work for somebody, but you have people that work with you. Do you have any advice for like, if you're not getting a raise up to inflation nowadays, you have to find some way to make that happen, right?
Right.
Why don't you talk to me a little bit about that or what you're seeing?
Yeah, what I've been seeing and kind of what I didn't execute myself back in my career, but once I was at the tail end of it, if I can go back, this is something I would do, is funny enough, don't stick in one place too long, depending on the role you're in and the skill set that you offer. So for example, for accountants, it's very much we're taught, okay, you come up at a certain firm. If you want, you can continue to work at that firm after you've received your designation and climb your way up to partner, which not very many people do. They go ahead and leave and go to what we call the industry, which is legitimate businesses, and work in their finance department. And, the typical career would then be stay at that company, continue to climb the ranks. Eventually you get promoted. They may change jobs one or two times throughout, but that's pretty much it, right? Very stable in that sense. But, I'm seeing that if you apply and go to a different role every 2 or maybe 3 years, especially as you level up in your skill set and the experience that you have, another company is typically willing to pay you more for that skill set. So essentially what I'm trying to say is, instead of waiting for the raise or the promotion at a certain company, it seems like it's going to be a while before you get it, maybe transitioning to another role typically comes with a significant pay bump.
I agree. Usually that happens, right? But like as someone who employs people, if I see someone jumping around every 2 to 3 years, red flag.
Right. Fair enough.
Right. But at the very least, you could apply to other roles and leverage that to be like, this is market standard. I'd get this at another company. So your 5% raise this year isn't going to cut it.
Right. And essentially negotiate with them that way.
And you could at least stay there.
Could be another tactic as well.
But the whole jumping around every 2 to 3 years, I know some industries, especially in like marketing and accounting and in tech, that's like a standard that people do.
Right.
But for me, I've done it in the last like year. We've hired like 6 people, and during the interview process, if I saw someone was staying for 2 years, I wouldn't even interview them.
Fair.
Because I'm like, that's not loyalty. And a lot of companies, a lot of people are undervaluing the value of loyalty nowadays. Or maybe they're coming around and realizing how like valuable that is.
Right. I guess for me, that answer comes from being an accountant, and, the skill set is very standardized in a sense. So, think of accounting as a language. Like, if you can speak Spanish very well, then, you can do this job very well. So you can always find another person who does it to a good extent, and then it's on you to get the soft skills and et cetera that makes you great. So I think in that industry, it's a lot more acceptable and less of a red flag per se. But I do.
You do have to consider both, though, because it is the case that if you do jump to another company, it's usually a much more significant pay bump, right? But someone that I know, actually, he got a significant pay bump. He was making like 120K as a software engineer.
Right.
And he got offered 180 to go to another company.
Wow.
And I was like, good for you, man. He's like, yeah, I'm starting in 2 weeks, I met with him 3 weeks later, and he was like, my company offered me the exact same amount to stay. And I was like, and he stayed.
Wow.
Right? So he was an example of someone who felt undervalued.
Right.
His employer was probably undervaluing him, got a job offer somewhere else, used that to leverage, and wanted to stay.
Right. That's amazing. I guess sometimes it takes you willing to leave for them to recognize that value.
Agreed. Before we jump into real estate, okay, I want to talk about a question that I got recently on Instagram, okay? So a young person on social media was asking me, they're in their mid-20s, and they said, can you share a few companies that you believe are significantly undervalued and worth at looking at during this time? How do you answer that question? Because I'm sure as an accountant, people are asking you for the latest hot thing to invest in right now. Should I invest in London? Should I invest in the Toronto condos? Is a certain industry more hot than others? How do you answer that question?
Like I guess the tricky part with this is people are always expecting a simple answer where, name what's the capital of this city, and you just have the exact finite answer to it. But this, when it comes to investing, it's one of those things where there's so many variables that can affect the answer. Your ability to finance it, or your investor appetite, your personal capital that you have available. These are all factors that are important. How long you can sit without seeing a return, how patient can you be? Do you need a dividend yielded every month? Do you need an interest payment coming in every month? There's so many different variables to answer this question.
Good.
But specifically with this, when it comes to undervalued companies and, people seeking my advice on that, the accountant answer, or, usually the financial advisor answer is usually based on looking at numbers, looking at the different PE ratios that are available for it, debt to asset ratios, and what I would call technical analysis, right? Discounted cash flows, et cetera. I personally haven't done any of that for equities currently based on the market. I'm usually using more of the approach of what are companies that I have researched and I know have a solid business model, I see future growth potential for. And in this current climate, I know I would go as far as saying everything's kind of on fire sale right now, just given the overall steady state of the market. So what I would advise this individual to do is look at companies that do have a solid business model, have seen great growth, and based on their traction so far, are going to continue to have good growth, but are just hurting right now because of the current market climate. Buy the stock and hold it for the long term, right? So an example would be something like Meta, which, formerly Facebook, doing big things, investing a lot of money into future technology and big changes in the future. They're getting hammered right now because of the current market climate. They had a few bad earnings calls and things like that, but the overall vision for the future, I see it being very positive. So that's something I would just buy, hold, and forget about for the future. Now, going back to what I initially said, it depends on your circumstance. Let's say you only have $10,000 available and you need to, utilize that $10,000 to essentially roll into another project or grow it as fast as possible to build your wealth. You may not be able to just put all of your capital in that one thing and forget about it for the long term, if that is what your goal is. So, that capital allocation may not work out for you. There may be other things that may yield a quicker return but require more active involvement. So based on your appetite and what you're trying to do, I would act accordingly.
So it depends. I love that. And that's true. Too many people think that it's like, oh, this is the thing that you have to do. Yeah. I like that analogy of the capital of a country. A mentor of mine, when I started in financial advising at the bank, he used to always use this analogy called TRIO, TRIO. And it stood for time horizon, risk tolerance, and investment objective. And when it comes to time horizon are you looking to buy a property in 2 years? Because you might not have the ability to invest in something too illiquid or too volatile, right? Or do you have 20 years where you could invest in a real estate property? It's fairly illiquid, but you can wait that out to get the ultimate rate of return compounded with the leverage effect, right? Risk tolerance, right? Are you a older, risk-adverse nonna like my grandmother, right? You're probably not going to be investing in Meta. You know what I mean?
Right.
Or are you younger? You understand the ups and downs of the equity market, or you do understand real estate, and therefore you can take on a little bit more risk. And in investing, risk is really standard deviation or volatility. It's not like risk at the casino, right? Where it's like, oh, I'm betting 100 to either make 100 or lose 100. It's more about like, can you stomach the ups and downs? Can you stomach interest rate risk, macroeconomic risk? like local municipality risk, for example, for like real estate.
Right.
So that takes into account as well. And then investment objective. So like, is your investment objective, like you said, to build passive income through interest and dividends, or is it to maximize capital appreciation over the long run?
Yeah.
And if you could answer all three of those questions, time horizon, risk tolerance, and investment objective trio, then you could actually make a more accurate investment decision on like what is the best investment for you. Mm-hmm. Another thing that I've been seeing a lot online is there's this guy, what's his name? The sales guy that we always like talk about, Alex Hermosi. Okay, are you familiar with Alex Hermosi?
Acquisition.com.
Yeah, exactly. And he's been pumping this concept out called the SNME 500. Or have you seen this one or no?
No, I haven't seen that one.
So it's like don't invest in the S&P 500, invest in the SNME 500, which is if you have $1,000 to $10,000 of investment, like money that you can invest in, people come and say, hey, Anthony, what should I invest in, right? And I'm like, well, first off, are you at your highest income earning potential? Well, no, I could probably make more money. Then instead of investing in the stock market at a 10% best case scenario rate of return on $10,000 is only $1,000 a year, right? Why not take that $10,000 and invest it in yourself?
Right.
Sales courses, persuasion courses, technical literacy courses, more academic or vocational courses, right? And you could actually, with $10,000, probably increase your income $10,000 a year.
Yeah.
Right? That's a 100% rate of return per year by investing in the S&P 500 versus the S&P 500.
Yeah,
also a different approach that you could take when looking to invest your money. Thoughts on that?
For sure. No, I've seen a lot of I want to say influencers kind of preach the same thing, like Grant Cardone, Bradley,
right,
etc. And no, I do agree. As long as you invest it in the right thing, and that earning potential or the skill you develop from that can yield you a much better return than what the investment can make. It's kind of like, you teach the fisherman how to fish, he'll fish for life versus
for sure
the other, just put in the money in, it'll give you a good return, but the potential is less.
Couldn't agree more. I actually wanted to ask you, now that we're on this topic, best investment that you ever made in yourself. Most influential, best investment, however you want to tackle it, and why?
Right. I think for me, to be honest, it wasn't a monetary investment. It was really investments in relationships. So I don't know if that counts as an investment in myself, but investing time in learning how to network, how to develop relationships, and then utilizing those skills to connect with like-minded individuals, keeping an open mind, and see where those relationships take me.
That's interesting that you say that, because I was going to say best investment that I've ever made was I spent $1,500 US, okay, on, are you familiar with Ty Lopez?
Yeah.
Okay, he's pretty sleazy, not going to lie, all right? He's like pretty well known to be sleazy on the internet.
Yeah.
But he came out with this course. It was called Social Media Marketing Agency, okay? And I remember $1,500 was so expensive to me back then. I was like probably 26, 25, and I was like, oh, $1,500, like I could really pop bottles at the club with that, right? Or whatever. And so it was $1,500 US. So I always remember I was like, oh, US too? That's so expensive.
Yeah, that extra 30%.
That extra 30%, right? So I bought it when I was 26 years old. And so I took the course. It was all about like how to structure social media as a service offering, that kind of thing. Yeah. And then a year later, I got 2 clients running their social media. It was in the summer of 2017, okay? And then 3 months later, in October, I started King Street Media because of it. And King Street Media just celebrated its 5-year anniversary yesterday, October 27th, 2017. I incorporated.
Yeah.
And yesterday, we celebrated our 5-year anniversary. We're like 13, 15 people strong. It's like a legitimate business right now. We do over $1 million a year of revenue, and that's pretty fucking crazy to me.
Yeah, that's amazing.
Off
Congrats.
Of that $1,500 investment in some sleazy guy's course online in 2016 led to kind of where we are right now, because I don't know if I'd be doing this if I didn't do that.
Yeah,
right?
That's amazing, man.
Yeah, but back to what you were saying before about relationships as well, is that although that was a really good, ROI investment, some of the best investments that I made were the ones that were just my time, which was like, hey, I'll work for you for free to like people that I wanted to be my mentors.
Right.
That led to so many doors opening. Like some of the best mentors I have right now started with, hey, what do you got that you need done? I'll do it for free.
Right.
How could you say no to that?
Yeah.
Right.
No.
And then I did it for
Offering
free, and it
value.
either turned into a paid opportunity or introductions or business ventures. And I really think there's a zeitgeist right now happening on social media where pay me for what I'm worth. But the concept of offering to do something for free, proving your value, and then getting compensated for it is really undervalued right now in society.
Yeah, for sure. Going back to, for me, the reason I went with relationships as my best investment is, there was a couple very key relationships that I developed, which allowed me to get exactly where I am today. Like if I hadn't met those people and, built relationships with them, started spitballing ideas, etc., there wouldn't be Foundation Capital today.
Right? Because didn't you meet those guys through Cash Flow Tribe, was it called? Or
No, not actually. That was a different organization that I think one of my partners was, he knew one of the owners of it, but we were never a part of that.
How did you meet them then? Who are
So
the people who's a part of
one
Foundation?
So the Foundation Capital is comprised of myself, my partner Mitt, Pirasaanth, and Jeffrey Weibo,
Right.
Based out of London, Ontario. So, I initially met Mitt in high school, and we were good friends.
High school,
in
really?
high
I
school.
thought it was university and accounting. You guys both took accounting together afterwards, right?
Yeah, exactly. So we knew each other in high school. We weren't super close friends at the time, but it was in university we started to develop that relationship, and we went on to work at PwC together. So furthered the relationship there, and started to discuss business ideas, ways to make money and grow our wealth, and really kind of started partnering on a lot of different ventures, some that worked out, some that didn't. And then along the road, Mitt actually met Jeff out in London when he was there for some audit work when he was working at a firm at the time. And, started to grow that relationship, and over time, again, realized he was another like-minded individual. The three of us connected, continued to invest time into the relationship, but also into potential projects and ways to grow our wealth. And over time, that investment has really scaled and
I'd say
paid dividends. You know what I mean? So
I would say
that's probably one of the best decisions I've made.
I love that. Valentina, they say that whoever is producer of the podcast becomes a wise investor within 6 months.
We'll see.
Because you're forced to listen to this absolute wise facts being dropped.
That's true.
Hey, what's been your biggest takeaway so far?
Forward button.
The S&Me 500.
The S&Me 500. We're going to run that as a micro piece of content for sure. AJ Fish? Okay, so let's move on to real estate because we are coming up on like 20 minutes left here.
Sure.
So I love watching your Instagram posts. You offer some really informative content. And like you've been sticking on that consistent for how long has it been now? Like 2 years?
Yeah, I think so. I think so. It's been it's kind of been a blur the last 2 years,
I'd
but
say, yeah.
I feel like I have been doing it for a while now.
Okay, so you recently spoke about multifamily investing on one of your posts, and I know you're really big on that now. I like it because it diversifies risks to a certain degree. For people trying to get started in investing in real estate, you can start there, but then moving their way up the chain to multifamily.
Right.
How exactly does that work? Can you define it first for us? Tell us a little bit about it,
for
and then
sure.
move into like the details.
Yeah, definitely. So maybe let's start off by talking about what the key differences between multifamily investing would be and just, regular residential investing. So the biggest thing is the way the properties are valued. So, if you were to go out and purchase a condo or a single family home, duplex, triplex, etc., typically the value is going to be based on what a comparable property sold for on the street.
Right.
That's also the reason why we're seeing a lot of those properties dipping in prices right now while multifamilies are staying strong.
Oh, really?
And we'll get into that shortly. So, you own this house, it's on this street, it has this many bedrooms, it has this many washrooms, it's worth this price in February, but now just because a few of them have sold at a much lower price, yours is now worth the lower price as well, purely comparable. Multifamily, on the other hand, is based on the net operating income of the asset. So it's similar to a business in a sense, right? Businesses are typically valued on, X amount of times what the revenue is worth or what the net income, what the gross profit is worth. Same thing with multifamily. If your asset can bring in this much net income and given the cap rate for the location of the building, it is going to be valued at this price. So another difference, let's go back to the regular residential properties. How do they appreciate and value? Again, comparable approach. So as time goes and people are paying more for that type of property, the value of that property has now gone up. Multifamily, to an extent, will inherently have a similar increase as well. But again, the main driving factor is the net operating income has gone up. So I'll give you a real life example of one of the projects that we were currently working on. We picked up a 29 unit building in St. Thomas, Ontario. We purchased it at $2.675 million.
Oh, that's a big number to a lot of people.
Right. But so again, we'll go into how that works. But so we purchased it at that price. We went in and we were able to get 14 out of the 29 units renovated, make them look like Toronto-style condos, put ensuite laundry in there, add a lot of value to these units, and now we're renting them out at the top market rent. So, one of these units that previously would have went for like $600 is now going for $1,700.
Wow.
Right?
Holy.
And you do that for 14 of the units, had the building revalued recently to refinance it, and it appraised at $5.5 million in about 16 months, right? That being said, we have system in place plus a little bit of luck to get 14 units done in that short amount of time. Usually it can take anywhere up to 5 years, 6 years. You just never know. But so you see the impact there. We didn't wait for the markets to slowly appreciate that value. It's like, okay, the income that this thing brings is significantly higher now. So therefore it's worth approximately $3 million bucks more.
But definitely that was not passive.
You
guys must have put in time.
No, we have
into
a team,
that.
we have systems, we have a lot of staff members involved in this operation to be able to accomplish something like that in the timelines that we try to set.
So definitely not for everybody, as it's like buying a business.
Yes,
and then
yes.
You've learned, which I'd love to know more about how you learned how to do this. But you've learned how to operate this kind of multifamily complex to be more value because of your input.
Yeah, exactly. The term we summarize it as is forced appreciation. So you're forcing the appreciation of the asset by driving up its income potential.
So the 2.7 mil, can you tell me a little bit about how that deal's structured? And then also, how did you learn to do this?
Yeah, so in terms of how this deal structures, so this one's solely owned.
Tell me how you learn how to do this first.
So initially, the concept is very similar to doing it with regular rentals. You purchase a property, you fix it up usually, and you rent it at a higher rent amount. And again, based on comparables, it's usually goes up in value. Excuse me. How we learned to do this is, again, or I was saying, instead of doing it for so many different properties in different places, why don't we just do this under one roof? First thing was to understand the valuation. So comparable approach versus net operating income approach.
Right.
Lots of content on YouTube about this, and you can really learn about how the values. You even have guys from like Colliers and commercial places just breaking out how those valuations are done. The other things that were associated with this, Anthony, the learning came as part of the project. So our first ever project was a 17-unit building in London, Ontario. We were kind of nervous about doing it. We had never done one before. Had no idea what kind of headaches and stuff that we may run into, but it was kind of taking that leap of faith We understood what kind of income potential the asset could have, what it currently had, what kind of financing we would need in place in order to make this happen, and just made the jump and went for it. So, I don't have a magical resource library or anything like that.
Trial and failure there.
Exactly.
Right? I remember calling you one day. It was like a Monday or a Sunday, and you were like, "Oh, I'm on a drive right now, pipe burst or something like that." Right?
Yeah. So exactly. So that's a call that would have happened earlier on because we didn't have the proper systems in place, the right people in place to treat this as a business at the time. That was just 3 people purchasing an apartment building, and we kind of manage it and figure out on our own. Now, to get the operation to where we are today, you have to treat it like a real business. You have to have full-time property managers that work exclusively for your company that are attending your units at all times. You got to have contractors that work for your company that are able to go in and not only do maintenance for the units, but also do renovations and service the volume that you're producing.
Right. Love that. Okay, cool. So you wouldn't advise it to anybody. What if someone who's like doesn't want to do all the operations, wants to get into multifamily? What would you recommend?
I would recommend them partnering with Foundation Capital because, we offer a model where the investors will be able to invest the funds that are required to purchase the building, renovate the building, and the holding costs associated with it. In exchange, we'll bring them a good building deal. We'll manage it, manage the entire project, make sure it turns around in the timeline that we have agreed to, and that investor gets a significant yield of the profits.
Where can someone find out more about that?
Yeah, so you can reach out to us at foundationcapital.ca or contact me on Instagram, and we have an application form for joint venture partners.
Love it. Thank you. Okay, so referring to one of your other recent posts, you said it's a better idea avoiding investing in the GTA condos and buy Toronto century homes instead. Can you explain your thought process on this? Define for us what a century home is and like why you said that?
Yeah, for sure. So to give some context, GTA condos, by no means am I saying is it a bad investment. I actually own a GTA condo as well, and it is typically a way for many investors to enter the market, very passive. Depending on the tenants that you put in, you don't need a lot of active management, and it'll do its thing and appreciate over time. The goal behind this post was to say, if you actually want to build wealth faster and actually have forced appreciation and are willing to put in the work versus, having something that's more passive, then buy a Toronto Century home because there's a lot more money to be made. And of course, that's going to come with a lot more work. You have to go ahead and do some renovations, maybe make some structural changes, etc. But when it's all said and done, that project's going to yield you a lot more money versus waiting for the condo to just naturally appreciate, right?
So another instance of this forced appreciation is, I'm guessing a Toronto Century home is like a home over 100 years old.
Yeah,
It's
exactly.
probably like old, broken down. You go in there, rejuvenate it, gave it a facelift.
Yes, exactly. And you also, a lot of them are single family homes, but you get it converted into a home that can have multiple units. So instead of one tenant in there, you can have 3 different tenants.
So this must be a competitive space, though. Like other people must be doing this, right? Like, you have any tips for people what to look for?
Yeah. So
are there realtors that specialize in this kind of thing?
It's funny because before I put the post up, it was more difficult to get the permitting and zoning and things like that done for something of this nature. It still is very intricate, but the city's become a lot more faster at doing it and getting it approved. But yeah, I would work with a realtor that knows the particular types of homes that would work well for this, are familiar with the layouts, because a lot of these Toronto Century homes have a very similar layout depending on where it's built. So someone who has experience doing this would be able to give you a little bit more advice on finding the right one to take on a project like that.
Love it. And before investing in real estate, this is more like 101 knowledge here, if we can, for a second. What does someone need to have cash-wise built up before making that first real estate investment. This is for the first real estate investors.
Yeah.
What kind of ammunition do they need? What kind of vault do they need in order to make that first plunge?
Right. So typically I would have at least 20% of the purchase price if you are going the investment route. You can qualify with 5 or 10%, but that's if you're going to be moving into the home. So 20% down plus whatever you think the renovation costs is going to be for the property. And I would also budget for the holding costs. So, let's say you think this property is going to take 6 months to renovate. You'd have 6 months worth of mortgage payments, property taxes, utilities, et cetera, to hold this property for 6 months. But I would strongly recommend taking it even further because these things always get delayed and potentially there's overruns and stuff like that. So I would even plan for whatever your renovation budget is, bump it up by 20%, and whatever you think your timeline is, maybe be prepared to even go double. So then that way, you don't get screwed in a situation where you run out of money and then have to liquidate it for pennies on the dollar.
I love that. Great. So what cities are you looking at right now?
Primarily, we invest in London, Ontario, as well as Chatham, Ontario.
Why?
Because the numbers work really well there. So the price that you can purchase these assets for versus what their income potential is, there's such a big discrepancy. So, for example, in Toronto, people just really want to live here. And, of course, that commands a certain rent. But all of the sellers, based on that desire, are trying to charge prices that are significantly more than what the building is worth based on its income.
A lot because of lifestyle and things like that,
right.
The glamour of living in Toronto.
Right, and they factor in more appreciation because, there's only so much Toronto real estate.
Right. So they may be if appreciation, if the value is here, like at X,
based on the numbers.
They may be over appreciating it X plus something.
Yep. It's similar to stocks in a sense where, you have a company and you look at its financials and this thing's been losing money for 5 years, but everybody's like, oh, shoot, Uber's public now. It must be a sick company. And then pump the stock price up way more than what it's really worth based on the technicals, right? That's kind of what happens.
You hear that, all you Liberty Village investors? That's what's happening there. Okay, cool. So just going to end off with 2 more questions. What does 2023 look like for PV? What makes them excited?
Yeah.
What are you excited about for the future?
I'm very much excited on continuing to grow and scale Foundation Capital. We're currently in the process of actually getting it turned into a true real estate fund where we can offer more investors access to the multifamily investments and give them the opportunity to do it passively where we're doing the work and being the operators, and they're having exposure to such a strong and favorable asset class without having to be actively involved.
I love that. You ever think you're going to go further than Ontario?
Yeah, definitely. I know there's a lot of opportunities in other places in Canada, but also the United States where the numbers work really well. I think we're going to continue to carve our piece of Ontario first, because the synergies just really work well with the systems and teams that we already have here, and then eventually go to build those same systems and teams out in those other regions as well.
What's the North Star for you? Where are you trying to go? When's enough?
Yeah, that's a question I ask myself all the time. I do have maybe an assets under management goal that I've been kind of workshopping, but I think it's going to be a combination of getting the fund to a certain place and seeing how many lives and investors we can impact as well along that journey.
Well, I'm one of your biggest fans, bro, so this is not going to be the last time.
Thank you, man. Appreciate it.
I'm switching it up, and I'm going to be asking this question to everybody on the show this season. Okay? And it was one that I heard recently online, and it really stuck with me, so I've been asking it to a lot of people, which is, what's one piece of wisdom that you wish you learned a lot sooner?
What's one piece, I don't know if this counts as wisdom, but one piece of knowledge that I wish I had much sooner that could change so many things would be understanding how debt works and how you could use it is something that the wisdom around that I've essentially gained over time, through the real estate game, but also through being an accountant, et cetera, that understanding and ins and outs of how that works, I wish I knew much sooner, because if you know how to use debt properly, you can scale your business or hustle or real estate investing or asset class investing so much faster. And let me give you guys a real life example. I left my corporate job and started an accounting firm from scratch, and attending networking events, shaking many hands in person. And slowly, you get that first one or two clients, they refer you another few. And it's a very slow grind before you get to this one snowball that now has gotten itself some credibility, and it goes so much faster, right? And, some people that they can get to that period in 3 years and then scale it up for the next 6, 7, 8, or some people might take them 3, 4, 5 years. Some people start early and then just give up because it didn't work out. Now, if I go back, if I had to start again and I were going to take that accounting path, and I understand how borrowing works and the power of leverage, I would redo the whole thing. And actually, Anthony, you might know this, like, from Naval's podcast as well, like, you have people leverage and then you have capital leverage, right?
Exactly.
When I'm talking about debt here, I'm really nailing the capital leverage. So why would I go ahead and start an accounting firm again from scratch like that?
Like organically.
When I can go ahead and buy one and have the BDC lend me 90% of the purchase price. And now I'm buying a book of business that's already good to go, has some sort of systems in place, may come with staff members. And now I have to put in the work and figuring out how to operate this thing, how to manage it. And here's the best part. Let's say that book of business cost $600,000. I now just purchased $600,000 of revenue. But after I pay my staff members, after I make my interest and loan payments to the BDC, that I'm now have a net $300K in my pocket, which I can use to either take a salary or reinvest into purchasing the next firm, and then the next firm, and then the next firm. Next thing you know, you have a $2-3 million gross revenue firm thanks to the power of leverage, versus imagine how long it's going to take me to shake hands and grind my way up to a $3 million firm.
I love that. And it's true. It's rephrasing it not as debt, but capital leverage or leverage. Right? And leveraging that capital to grow more exponentially. Most people are grown up being afraid of debt, because maybe that's a generational thing, a cultural thing. But
very much a cultural
wisely,
thing in my place. Yeah. Go ahead. Yeah. It's a pleasure, man.
Thank you, everyone, for listening to this week's episode of What They Did Not Teach You in School. PV, you're a gentleman and a scholar. Thank you for being on. Until next time.